if I were to start with anything, it would be if you do not love yourself, you are fighting a completely uphill battle. I just know that it's made a complete difference in my life to recognize how important that is.
Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions.
Welcome back to Women You Should Know. We are so delighted to have you with us. It is our focus here at this podcast to bring to you the voices, the movements, the innovations of women who you may not know prior to now, and yet they are women who are incredibly active in our world, who are so important to know as inspirations for audacity, for courage, for taking our little idea that we've kept on the back shelf and taking it out into the world in such a way that it can be a positive effect on our lives and the lives of all those around us. Today, we have just such a woman with us, Beth Kennedy. Beth has been producing and directing theatrical events since the mid-90s throughout the U.S., but primarily in Washington, D.C. and New York City. She's a founding member of the Colorado Environmental Film Festival. Yes, I am reading this. Her entrepreneurial spirit and professional contacts enabled Beth to launch and manage the BZN International Film Festival beginning in 2018. So she is the artistic managing director for the Bozeman Film Celebration, and she is so much more than that. So it is my complete pleasure to introduce you to Beth Kennedy.
How nice. Thank you, Leslie. It's a lovely way of opening up this program. Thank you.
Well, there is so much I want to speak with you about, and of course we could go in 30 directions. We'll have to do just 30 different podcasts at different times. But for today, where I'd like to start, just for the fun of it, is what is one thing that is not on your bio that you would love people to know about you?
I think, without saying the exact amount of time, but that to say, yeah, it absolutely took me 6 years to make the decision to figure out how to love myself. And that, I think, if I were to start with anything, it would be if you do not love yourself, you are fighting a completely uphill battle. And it takes absolutely conscious effort. It might take everybody, their effort has to be different on this issue. And I think of that as far as especially the differences between how a man might go about it with male privilege and how a woman might go about it. And I just know that it's made a complete difference in my life to recognize how important that is, and why perhaps we are told continually not to love ourselves when it is the most important thing we can do.
It is the most important thing we can do. And one of the things I'd be interested in hearing from you is ways you have seen our world telling us not to love ourselves, because that it is really subvert. It is not put on billboards, don't love yourself. What are some of the ways that you specifically were given this message?
Well, I think the biggest one, especially when you mention billboards, it's that certainly advertising tells us that, no, we have to change ourselves, because of course the advertisers, that's what they have to do in order to make money for whatever the companies are that are trying to get us to purchase whether it's a whole diet system or clothing or hair or whatever, the list goes on and on. So I think those messages that are given to us from a very young age are huge. But I think we give it to each other. No matter how kind we can be with each other, with the way we treat one another, I think that's probably the biggest way. Our doubts, and it's coming from a place. It's interesting. It's like, if I am not secure in who I am, then I am constantly sending out doubt to everyone. And how they pick it up can often be that they're thinking that we doubt them when actually we're doubting ourselves. So, I mean, that's why to me this is so essential to love oneself and to get really grounded with that and secure, because then you are creating this incredible ripple effect. It's impacting your life directly and creating this incredible ripple effect with everyone that you work with, because you're not constantly sending out this sense of doubt and insecurity and lack of confidence. And that can do that if done from a truly secure position, because it's not arrogance, it's not a sense of self-righteousness. I mean, loving yourself, truly loving yourself, comes from a very wonderful, secure, joyous, grateful position. And then that has such a valuable impact on others. So to get back to your question, I think we encourage it. I know I'm a parent. I am absolutely certain I've encouraged negative thoughts with my children with no intention of doing that, but it coming from a lack of security in myself as a parent, as a woman, as somebody who's educated or not educated, all those pieces. So I think that that's a critical one too. So the advertising, how we impact one another, and then of course the messages throughout the centuries. I mean, the best way, or one of the strongest ways to control people, is to make them feel that they don't have any value, and that whatever has to come into play, whether it's government or companies that are trying to sell one something, or a neighbor that needs to feel a sense of power, so they're going to make you want to feel less about yourself.
One of my pet peeves is the way advertisers in August start running commercials about the flu season is coming up. Now, that is not specific to women, but it speaks to your point of how advertisers teach us to be less than, teach us to see ourselves as not quite what we are. But the point I'd love to go back to is parenting. The point that you touched on knowing that you have given your children negative self-imaging, negative ideas, just because that's where you are coming from. That is the legacy that we leave in this world, is how, or at least I believe this is how we leave legacy, is what we leave through our children and through the people we affect. Is there anything that you can do in the way of supporting your children to change that legacy that you are leaving and to change their process and their life going forward?
One is to get rid of any guilt. That doesn't mean not taking responsibility. And I can't say that I've done anything, although one of my children might differ about this, but that I've ever done anything intentionally to ever, I can actually say I've never done anything intentionally to hurt anyone in my personal life or in my public life. I whatever that comes from, I'm really grateful to say that. That doesn't mean that I haven't unintentionally done things that have hurt people, and I've gotten really good over the years of putting my foot in my mouth. So I know that I've done that. But with my children, I know I've never intentionally done anything. But just even coming from a sense of my own insecurities, etc., I know I've said things. The kids will say sometimes something, well, you said blah 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 blah, and I'll think, but I didn't mean it that way, but that's how they heard it. So I could carry this guilt and hurt and all of these things forward. into the next how many years of my life. And that is, to me, would be just adding problems to it, to take away that sense of guilt. And I had a really good friend that helped me for several years, and she had never had children, but she just kept telling me I had to drop this. But I felt I had to carry it around. It's like worry. As a parent, we think we have to be worried, or I hear that often from people. Well, we have to worry, and it's like, of what value? Those messages, that worry message, then gets picked up from your child of, you don't trust me, you don't have any confidence in me, you don't believe in me. So to drop worry, to drop guilt, to allow them to have their own journey. And I get faulted for this, but within the moment, we are doing our very highest, and we're not going to raise our experience unless we acknowledge that, and then that desire to bring more value to our own personal life and to those around us. Did I answer your question?
You did. And one of the things that I really want to pull out of your response, so that we make sure that our listeners get to hear this part, is the fact that you are conscious of the fact that you've never intentionally hurt anyone. And I do believe that for the most part, that's where the majority of us sit. We haven't gone around intentionally causing harm. And to be able to notice, to be just courageous enough to acknowledge that, oh, I didn't mean harm, but I did do harm here. That, I believe, is one of the greatest challenges for everyone, and certainly for women, is just being able to own it. You can say that wasn't my intent, but to be able to say, but I do see where that happened. So now, since I've owned that, since I've said it out loud, I'm less likely to do it again. And that's the PowerPoint of taking responsibility.
And actually, it goes again to get to that position, that platform.
Yes.
Loving yourself. Why it's so important is because then you can take ownership and take it from you don't have to start defending you or excusing. You can say, okay, from this position, I am going to love myself, which is to encourage and forgive. That's a big piece of loving anything, is that forgiveness, that patience, that tenderness that we give to ourselves and go, gosh, I did not at any point mean to hurt, but by my not speaking up in these points, by wanting to be good or wanting to be sweet or not wanting to create any anger or turmoil. And there's certainly instances where we have to do that, or else our very existence could be at jeopardy because of violent actions, whatever. I'm not talking about that, but the way that we enable those around us, and then therefore ourselves as well, enable ourselves to do something that down the road we would have gone, whoa, I wish I had done that better. But to take ownership and recognize that one's experience, for the most part, is not, we're not targets. We do have to recognize where we can step forward and state our voice and not have to be in defense or anger or come from a level of frustration, but to say, no, what I think is this is what I believe. And if it's different than what you believe, can you explain to me? Because I'd like to understand. And when you're not defensive, it's amazing how you can be open and not have to manipulate the picture around you. And that's where enabling comes. We are actually manipulating what's happening, not only in our own experience, of course, but those around us. And that's when we can really create problems.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So thank you for that point. Now, I know I wanted to speak with you today about the whole experience of coming into that space of having enough self-awareness that we can recognize the spaces where we are not loving ourselves, And therefore, we are limiting the amount of love that we can receive from outside of ourselves. And I know love yourself and loving ourselves and not loving ourselves, this has been spoken about so much, and it can feel pretty slippery. It can feel pretty nebulous. What does that even mean? But to be able to recognize ourselves in a way that the actions we take and the words we speak honor who we are and give voice to our inner integrity. What was your journey of coming to this place? Because as you said at the beginning, here you are 6 decades later, and you've really come to this space of recognizing a new level of love of yourself. What did that journey look like for you, and what does it feel like to be in your current place?
Well, to be really happy. And it's not that I've never thought about myself as being an unhappy person, but I think a lot of my being happy was, and my dad used to always say, is everybody happy? It's like you put yourself there. And I do think that's much better than walking around with a, dark cloud over your head. But I think the biggest thing is like to really feel it in my entire system, is this sense of just loving being alive, and a lack of fear, and worry. And although I still absolutely, there are things that come up and I have to critically think about them and work through them, it doesn't come from a sense of panic, which I think is great because there's a sense of security there. Part of the journey was to really understanding love. It's not just certainly being nice. I grew up in a household where, the love thy neighbor as thyself was important. It's a lot of times, I don't know if other people think this or not, but to like somebody was like a lesser thing than love. You could like somebody in school, but you loved your parents. Well, I think of them as being very separate things. I don't think we're asked to like everybody. We can actually say, I don't agree with this person's behavior, or whatever. The list can go on, politics, whatever. But to love someone, to me, is to identify them to valuable action. That's loving somebody. And then, so I know that I always had a respect for myself, and I liked my actions in most of the time. But to love oneself is when you do recognize something that is not, whether I'm looking for creativity or intelligence or wisdom or patience or tenderness or compassion, to recognize when I'm not being there, to recognize that I have every ability to get there, to be there, and to allow that, instead of going to the place of going, you idiot, why did you do that? Which is, we know those thoughts can go on in our head, where we are our own worst enemy. So to love oneself is that regardless of what takes place, to recognize it, to see it, to know that that is not how you want to identify yourself, and then to actively work to change that behavior. And that to me is truly loving oneself. And from that, I mean, a big part of it is just not being angry at oneself or condemning oneself. It's actually, the way that hopefully you would be with your friends or with your children, or is to encourage their good and to recognize that. That to me is loving oneself. To get there,
Yes, tell me about your personal journey to get there.
so to get there, I think I had to step away from, I mean, I came to Montana, and ended up here with really knowing no one. And I think I needed to be there, so that I didn't fall back into the habit of taking care of other people, and having that be where I found that I could, kind of pat myself on the back and feel good about me, was because I was serving whatever, all those different levels of feminine qualities. Which is not to say that men don't do that, but that being there as a caretaker and to allow myself to do that, which meant being really far away from my kids and coming up here from New Mexico and putting myself in a home where I was completely alone and allowing that process. And I didn't go into a sadness, but going, you know what, I put myself here for a reason and I'm going to accept it. I'm going to jump on board. And that really started shifting things and acknowledging that where I had been jazzed all my life was having whether family members or friends or employers go, oh my gosh, you're incredible. You're just great. And so I felt like, okay, then I had accomplished something. And yet it wasn't, I was thinking I was incredible or fun. And I got to a place where I actually absolutely loved being with myself. I mean, I laugh a lot, totally alone. I dance, I sing, I frolic, and got to that place. But I think for whatever reason, I had to be alone to get there.
I think being alone is something that serves all women. I have this idea, this fantasy world where when young women get out of high school or college or whatever they do, that they live alone for 3 years and get to know themselves. But that's just my little fantasy world.
I think you're so dead on, right? And yet, if during that entire time, one is thinking, I'm going to be okay once I am partnered. I'm going to
Right.
be okay, because you have to totally give in to that being and not thinking about, I am doing this for this. I am doing this for this. That being in the moment and being in the now and being present, and it's not about the future. That's to me is critical.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that too many women just cannot be alone. And I have observed for years that they go from one self-destructive relationship to maybe not a self-destructive relationship, maybe just an unfulfilling relationship, to an overtaxing relationship, but they don't have that space in themselves to say, enough, enough. One of the conversations you and I had as you were going along this journey was around noticing how you, and I observed this to be true of many women, just weren't taking up your full space in life.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that I think we should all go and cut out several acres and fill it up with stuff. But thinking of being small, whether it's size double zero or not having a lot of material items, that then you could kind of slip in almost between the cracks. Nobody would be doing a pushback because you really weren't taking up that much space, right? So,
Right.
we'll excuse that, or we won't give that too much negative attention. Yeah, when I recognized that, I was appalled. It's like, wow, that's really interesting. Not only from a level of I've worked incredibly hard in my life and have thought that even for like material purchases, I've been wise about it and conscientious. Um, but then even still thinking that if I didn't have anything, I would be more valuable. And I'm not certainly not talking about this from a perspective of, the person that decides to be a monk and get rid of all their items, because I see that happening, taking the St. Francis of Assisi approach, that there's so many values to that. But I'm talking about thinking that you're not allowed to take up, as you said, take up any space. That something about it, that if you were invisible, you'd be easier to deal with or to appreciate or to include, which is absolutely ridiculous because you're invisible. You're invisible.
There's the opposite to that. And I see a lot of women fall prey to this. If you have enough of the right clothes and enough of the right jewelry and enough of the right accessories, and you have the home that's just perfect, then you are acceptable. And they just kind of disappear behind all of the stuff. I see it all the time as a wonderful example of someone who is not loving themselves enough to climb into their own skin. They're just climbing into the orchestration of the advertisers and the societal invitations or demands. What did you have to give up in order to become who you are now, in order to be able to love yourself? What cherished belief or thought or idea or pattern did you have to give up?
Gosh, that could take years to say all those things. And I never thought of myself as being a consumer. There have been long times in my life that I've considered myself a minimalist and felt very comfortable in that space. There have been certain things that have happened on just a level of finances, and because I did decide that one of the pieces of stuff that I was going to accumulate was children. So just from a financial basis, there are things that you don't bring into your experience.
I think the advertisers it fascinates me. To me, it's say, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Some will claim the advertisers implant these insecurities.
Mm.
And some will say that they have learned to, I don't know, built algorithms or some crazy thing, I don't know, that is above my head, to determine where the insecurities are, and then they target those. I think it's a little bit of both. But one of the things that I find fascinating is looking at the advertising from the perspective of what are they targeting now? I have this ability to just stand back and look at it on a rare occasion because I haven't had a television in 30 years. But when I see it on a billboard or a magazine cover at the grocery store, who are they targeting now? And what belief system are they targeting? And I have such enjoyment in taking that in and wondering, okay, I'll just look at that and see if I have a little bit of that inside of me. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But it's a wonderful, I think if we look at advertising from the perspective of who are they targeting? What are they selling me? What are they trying to tell me about me? And does it fit? Then we can actually use them to our advantage rather than to their advantage.
It's interesting. I don't know. What is that quote? Agree with thy adversary quickly while thou art in the way with him, right?
Yes.
And when you were saying that, I don't know, I was just thinking about, I was just recently in Utah, and I don't see that many billboards around in Montana. They exist, but I'm just not on the highways. But going down there, and there are all these huge billboards, and it has something to do with plastic surgery. And there'll be some, really fun looking couple or a woman or whatever, and what you need to do and who you need to call to get it. And so the way that can point its finger up at, oneself can be, well, you don't look like that. You need to look like that. Yeah. And that can be a very negative, message to take into one's heart. So instead, with that idea of agreeing with that adversary, because it's not coming across positive, it's coming across negative. And having at one point a zillion years ago, having done some modeling, I never wanted to be up there in a picture and have anybody feel badly about themselves, but that's a possibility that happened. So instead, if you kind of looked at that advertisement, that billboard, and said, oh, doesn't she look lovely? She looks lovely. I'm so glad for her. And I look like this. And I'm going to be so glad for me that I look like me because this is what I got rolling here. And take all those ads and turn it into a positive message for oneself. When, yes, and we have to be extremely mindful. I have 2 films, one of which I was going to show this year, which was Social Dilemma, which has now gotten a lot of attention and is one can see it because it's in distribution. Another film that's coming out is Trust Me, and we're working with this group right now that did this film, which has a lot of the same information, but they've also come up with workshops on how to deal specifically with marketing, with the social media that is pummeling us, and it is able to directly target who we think we are, or however we come across on our devices. And it can be incredibly positive, and it can be incredibly negative, and we have to get very it's called media literacy. And I think that in no time in the past have we been subject to the onslaught of these messages. And they're often not really encouraging our highest self, but really pinpointing our dark circles. So as you're saying, if we know that that's actually coming at us that way, if we are mindful, we could use each one of those messages as a way to encourage and support our positive development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful, wonderful idea, Leslie. That has to be explored more.
And let's get on and explore it. I've been playing with it for years. I think it's fun. I think it's fun to notice what's going on and then turn it on its head, particularly since I speak with people all the time. So I'm always sharing those insights. When someone moves into an onslaught at this point, are you comfortable saying, excuse me, this is not okay? It's just not okay. Or something along that vein. Being able to very gently, graciously, and firmly state a boundary.
That happened a couple of weeks ago, actually. And it was from someone that I've known since the early 70s. And I have never heard this person, never heard them raise their voice, never even heard them say anything unkind or ever be, nothing. And something was said, and I stated that I actually had a really wonderful Christmas. And with all the tragedies that are going on right now, I certainly understand that. But it was a very wonderful time. It was different than my Christmases in the past, and I enjoyed it. And this sparked something in this other person. And what came out was extremely ugly. And my first thought was, I have to calm them or soothe them or make them feel that even though they're being ugly, that it's okay. And then it was like, you aren't going to go there anymore. And I said, I definitely had compassion, and said, this is not a place that I wanted to go to in, our relationship. But I was willing to hold my own, and not feeling that their comfort was more important than mine, especially because I knew I hadn't done anything that was unkind. And then I was able to kind of step back from it and recognize that they were not my responsibility. And that was only, the beginning of January. So yeah, I have had that situation.
That's great. And I love that as we're coming to a close, we come to that point, because that is the number one thing I have seen women. And let me stand at the front of the line. I'm not pointing fingers at everybody else and saying I'm so all that. No, I've done these things. That is one of the number one things that I see women do, that I have seen myself do. And we all have different responses to it, but we take responsibility for things that are not ours. And to be able to let everybody have their own responsibility for their own pieces is one of the most empowering things I believe that as women we can do. And it is one of the most self-loving things that we can do. Again, back to the fact that loving yourself can be nebulous. I so enjoy pointing out little points of action that we can take, very specific points of action, and letting everyone take responsibility for their own stuff is a key point of action. So thank you for that, Beth.
Leslie, thank you for inviting me. I so appreciate it.
Absolutely. And to all of those of you tuning in, I do hope you were able to receive 1 or 3 or 5 great nuggets that will fuel your day, that will fuel new thought for you, that will fuel your innovation and your audacious action. And as you go through your day, I just want to remind you, you are stronger and wiser than you know, and nothing is beyond you.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We hope you received inspiration for expanding your own social innovation and influence. Help us inspire others by sharing this episode and leaving your comments over at lesliemichaels.com/podcast. For more tips, insights, and support in creating a fully audacious, professional, and personal lifestyle you love, visit our Women We Should Know community on Facebook.